Hi everyone, it's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique, and I'm back as promised to continue on with our little bead embroidery project using a marquee shaped crystal. In the previous little short video, we discussed how to secure a crystal with a point back to our interfacing so that we can begin a bead embroidery project such as this one. And today we're going to go ahead and create a peyote bezel around this beautiful crystal using some delicate beads and some 15-0 beads. These are some 11-0 Mayuki Delicos, and they are silver lined gold transparent delicate beads. And I'm going to also be using just very few of these Toho round 15-0 beads in the Starlight galvanized gold. So to begin with, I have threaded on a wingspan and a half of some 6-pound fire line in the crystal, which is, is the whitish clear colored kind. And down here at the tail end, I have tied a series of knots so that I have a small knot so that when I go through my interfacing, it doesn't pull all the way through. To make this knot, all that I did was I took my thread and I looped it around and crossed it, and then I took the bottom end through the loop twice, pulled it secure, and then repeated the same process and pulled the second knot right on top of the first knot. Now, because we have this two pointy-ended stone, I'm going to show you a way that I figured out how to create a beautiful peyote bezel and have your bead count still come out even, but also to have it look really good on the pointed ends, such as in my sample piece. So to begin, the first thing we need to do is insert our needle and thread through the interfacing. And as you can see that I'm coming up through this interfacing just slightly to the left side of the point of the stone because I'm left-handed. I want it to be about the size of one bead away from the point. So I might get a little bit closer to the point here. When I pick up my first two beads, I want one delicate to fall to the left of the point and one delicate to fall to the right of the point. So you can see there where I've positioned my needle. I'm just going to bring it all the way through, and hopefully my knot is going to catch on the back of this interfacing and not pull all the way through, and it has. So we've obtained some success right there. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to pick up two delicas. We're going to let them come all the way down to the bottom of our working thread here to where they sit on top of this interfacing. I'm going to position those two beads, and this is a little fiddly at first, but you'll see what I'm trying to do here. Is I want these two beads, I want one on one side of the point and the other one on the other side of the point. Then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come down right in front of that delicate bead here on the right. Just like that. I'm going to pull that all the way through and position my beads so that they sit on either side of this tip of my stone. Then I want to come back up through my interfacing right at the top of right on the point of that stone, in between the two delicate beads, but on the inside edge closest to the crystal here. You see that? See how the thread is on the opposite side of my needle going out this way? I'm going to make sure I'm on the inside of that thread, close to the point. Pull it through, and then I'm just going to go right down through that delica on the right because that's the direction that I'll be sewing in. I'll just go ahead and pull my thread through just like that. And then we have our first two beads in place. Now we're going to peyote stitch, or actually just do our base row stitch here all the way down this side, which is the right side. I've just flipped around so I'm working upwards. We're going to work our way around to the point on the other end of our crystal here. So we're going to pick up two beads each time, I'm going to let them fall down into place just like this. We're going to take our needle and we're going to go down through the interfacing directly in front of that last delica that we picked up. We're going to pull that down through, pull our thread. Then when we come up, we're going to be on the inside of the working thread. So in other words, we're going to be between the working thread and the stone, just like that. And we want our needle to come up directly behind that last delica bead, the one in front, just like that. And after we pull the thread through, we just step through that delica bead in the front, just like that, so that we can add more beads. Drop my needle, so give me just a sec. And there we have 4 beads on. So we're just going to do that same step right there by picking up 2, position them down onto the interfacing. We're going to take our needle. We're going to come down right in front of the last bead we picked up, as close to our stone as we can get without going underneath the stone. We're going to come back up right behind that last bead we picked up, but we're going to be between the working thread, should be on the left side of the needle, the stone should be on the right side of the needle, just like that. Pull through, then pass through the last delica, just like this, to position your working thread to pick up more beads. So I'll show you another one. I've picked up 2 more delicas. Let them fall down into place right beside the stone. I'm going to take my needle and come down through the interfacing right in front of that last delica I picked up. Pull my thread through. I'm going to come back up through the interfacing between the working thread and the stone, right behind that last delica I picked up. Pull through, and then step up into that last delica again before picking up the next set of beads. So that's all I'm going to be doing until I've achieved the length down here to the other end of the stone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep working until I get to that corner. Then I'm going to come back and show you guys how to make the turn as we want to go around the other side of the crystal. So as you're working and as you let your 2 delicas fall down, is in this step here, notice that my line of delicas stays nicely to the top line of this crystal. It's really easy to accidentally poke your needle too far under that stone. So you don't want to do that. You want to pay attention to where you're actually putting that needle when you sew down through the interfacing, to make sure you're staying on that straight line and going straight down and then not going underneath the stone. If you go under the stone, you're going to have trouble securing it in the bezel and making it look nice and professional. So you want to make sure that you're following this upper line. And if your interfacing allows it, you can actually trace the stone with a felt tip pen that way. But it's best to try to get yourself comfortable with knowing where your needle is going and following the upper line of the stone. So as you can see, I've reached nearly the top corner here of my beautiful marquise crystal. So I've picked up 2 beads, just like we've been doing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to make a judgment call here. So I'm going to let these beads drop down. And I'm going to see what position they actually fall in. I think my thread has actually gone through a little bit of the interfacing. So if you tug it just slightly, that should straighten up that problem. So as you can see here, I picked up these two crystals, and those two delicates. And when I let those drop down, they fit nicely right there to the point of my crystal. I don't, if I were to stretch that bead around to the other side, like so, it's going to probably leave too much of a gap. So I'm going to poke my needle down through the interfacing right at the tip, right there at the point of my crystal in front of that last delica that I picked up. And I'm going to go ahead and sew these two beads on this left side of the crystal. Then I'm going to come back up just like I did between the stone and the working thread right behind that last delica. Then I'm going to go ahead and sew through that delica just exactly like we've been doing all down this particular side. I'm going to get my thread right behind that last delica and sew through. Just like that. So now I'm going to make the turn, and I'm exiting from this last delica bead here. So to make this turn, you can see that I've dropped my two delica beads straight down. I'm going to come up just really close in to where the front of that last delica is, and I'm going to sew down through my interfacing on the side, on the right-hand side of the stone. And it makes it a lot easier if you flip your work so that you're sewing up when you're trying to get these two beads to cooperate with you. And then I am going to come up, just like I've been doing, between the thread and the stone, right behind that last delica bead. And then just simply sew through that last delica bead that you picked up. Now you've made the turn, and you're ready to just keep on adding two beads at a time till you come all the way up to this bead here. And I will meet you back when I get really close to finishing up this row. One thing I did want to mention is if you make a mistake and you need to pull some beads off, because you're sewing through this interfacing and just in general because you don't want to create a knot, if you need to take a stitch out, simply take the needle off of your working thread, pull the beads out to make your corrections, rethread, and carry on. When you're working with bead embroidery and you're trying to bezel a crystal or a cabochon, being able to keep this line on the outside edge here and have a nice smooth line is very important to how the overall project comes out looking. And if you're familiar with beading needles, you know that they bend really easily. I like to keep a pair of pliers just sitting around handy so that I can straighten my needle up from time to time. And this helps me to keep my straight line looking really good as I continue on. Okay, so I have worked my way around. And if you'll notice here, I have my next two beads just kind of sitting down here. I haven't sewn them down yet. Plus, I have two more on the needle just to show you guys something. With the two beads on, you can see that I'm going to have a small gap right there. If I add two more to keep my bead count even, because it has to be even in order for this bezel to work out properly, you can see that it's going to make a little bit of a pull right there. There's going to be one extra bead sitting there. Let me mash those down just a little bit better so you can see what I'm talking about. You see that that one bead is going to overlap. So you're going to have to make a judgment call here about whether to add 2 or 4 beads. When I made this particular sample, I didn't really run into that as much. I didn't have such a problem. At this one, you know, there could be a slight variation in the crystal. It could be any number of things. So to test this out, I'm going to leave those 4 beads on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just, instead of sewing down through my interfacing, I'm going to sew straight through the very first bead here on the left side of the crystal that we added at the very start. I'm going to pull that through, and I'm going to take a look and see how that looks. It doesn't look too bad. So I think what I'll do is I will go ahead and leave that in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew down through the interfacing now between the thread and the crystal right there at the point. So I'm going to do that right in front of the bead that I, sewed through. And like I said, if I didn't like it, I could basically just take my needle off and pull all of that back out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew backwards here and come up between the thread and the stone. And I'm going to come back to where my needle is right behind the third bead down. So I have the fourth bead down. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right here. Then I'm going to sew through those 4 beads again. Just like we've been doing, straight along. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to try to come through all 4 of those beads. I'm going to use my fingers to kind of hold those beads into position. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to sew down through all of the beads on the right hand side. I'm going to sew through all the beads all the way around my crystal without going down and up through the interfacing or any of that. I'm just simply going to sew through all the beads one time to straighten up these delicas and pull them into a straight line. So make sure that you don't skip any, like I'm skipping that one there. You want to bring it back out and make sure that you don't skip any beads along the way, or you will have an exposed thread showing. So now I'm not skipping any. And just keep sewing through all of the beads until you've come all the way around the beadwork. So once you've sewn through all of your beads, you'll want to make sure that you are exiting the last bead at the corner on the one side or the other. I'm on the left side here. I want to be exiting this last bead. So now what we're going to do is we are going to peyote stitch for a few rows. As you can see here that we've used peyote stitch to create this bezel. So we're exiting from this bead. We pick up one, we skip one bead and sew through the next. And I'm going to go ahead and put my little magnifying headset on because basically you don't want to make a mistake here. So I've talked about this little headset several times on my blog and on here on YouTube. It is a lifesaver when you are trying to make sure that you get your stitches right and that you don't miss anything or potentially sew into the wrong bead. Alright, so let's start that again. We're going to pick up one. We are going to skip one and sew through the next. So I'm skipping that one and sewing through the next. And as I pull the thread through, the bead that I picked up will sit on top of the bead that I skipped over if I've done everything correctly. All right, from this position, you can actually see it better from this position. So this is the bead I skipped over. This is the bead I sewed on. All right, so I'm just going to carry on doing that all the way around the beadwork. And because we made sure we had an even number of beads, everything should work out just fine. So I'm picking up one, skipping one, and sewing through the next. Now, this is just basic peyote. We just happen to be doing it onto, our beads that we sewed around our interfacing. And I'm encouraging these beads to stand upright. So in other words, they're coming up towards the stone, as you can see here. We're going to be working a couple of rounds, and we're going to be encouraging these beads to come up and over the girdle of our crystal here. So just pick up one, skip one, sew through the next, and I'll just keep working my way around, and I'll meet you guys back when I get down towards the other corner of the gems of the crystal, and we can talk about you know, how about we go about turning the corner. As I come up here to the end of the row, you'll see that as I skip one, pick up one, skip one, and sew through the last one, the next one I sew through is the last bead on this side of the beadwork. So we will go ahead and pull that bead into position. And now to round the corner, really all we have to do is just pick up the bead. We're going to skip the next bead here on the other side and sew through the next. Just like that, just like we started the first side. And then all we have to do from there is keep going until we have our first round of peyote stitch on the other side of the crystal that we're bezeling here. And you can take your finger and smooth the beads upward as you work, just to keep everything looking as good as you can. So I have come around and I am getting ready to add my last bead on this side. So you see where my thread is exiting. I've picked up a bead, I'm skipping the second to the last, and I'm sewing through the last bead on this side. So that is the last bead I need to add. But what I need to do is step up. So as I'm coming out of that bead, I'm going to go up through without picking up anything. I'm just going to come through that first bead I added here on the other side of the beadwork. So this is the very first bead I've added. You can see that it's lined up with the one below it. And I'm going to step up by just passing through that bead. I'm going to flip my work around at the same time so that I'll be sewing in the opposite direction. So now I have my first row of peyote beads added, and now you can plainly see the sticking up beads really well, which we're going to use as we add this next row. So one thing I want to talk about is the count of the rows. So in normal peyote, when you pick up all the beads for your first initial pickup, you're going to be actually picking up the beads for rows 1 and 2. And then as we sew that first round of peyote, that actually accounts for row 3. And you can see that here on the side. By counting the beads, we have 3 beads in place. It's a little bit difficult to see with this just because of the interfacing, but you'll see here, right where my finger is pointing, that's row 1. The second bead that we skipped over is row 2. The bead we just added in the last round is row 3. So now we're going to do one more row of delicate beads. We're going to do the final row with the 15-0 beads. So we've stepped up and we're in position to start our regular peyote. So all we need to do on this round is pick up a bead and sew through the bead sticking up next. So we're actually skipping one and sewing through the next bead, which is the one sticking up. And you'll see that this pulls, you can definitely see now that we have a little bit more beadwork coming up off this interfacing. So let's go ahead and add this round. Make sure that you're really careful and you're sewing through the beads that are sticking up. Remember I told you to kind of coax those beads upwards like this so that it's easier to find the sticking up bead this fourth round. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And when we get to the end, I will show you guys, I'll come back and show you guys the step up one more time. But I'm just going to continue on picking up a bead and sewing through the next bead from the previous row. The ones that are sticking up on the top. Alright, so I'll finish this fourth row and I'll meet you guys back. So I've come around and I'm getting ready to add the last bead. So I'm sewing, coming out of this bead here. I've picked up one. I'm sewing through the next sticking up, but at the same time I am stepping up into the first bead of the fourth round. So you can see that I'm passing through those two on the diagonal. And in essence, I'm just going ahead and completing 2 steps at one. And so now you can see that our little bezel is looking really good. when you take the time to coax those beads into place as you work, it makes for a better looking project, and everything fits really nice and looks really good. So we almost have the crown of the crystal sitting below the bezel line. So in order to complete that, we're going to use the 15-0 beads. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and clean up this little round of 11s. You know, I'll dump out my 15ths and come back and show you guys how to do the last row. So now we're already stepped up, so we can continue on with this last row. And all we need to do is just pick up a 15, and we're going to sew through the next one sticking out. So you can see here where my working thread is exiting from this bead, and I'm going to be sewing through this first bead sticking out, which is a little difficult on camera. You have to turn it just a slight bit there. There we go. So I'm going to sew that 15 right between those two delicas. And I'm going to continue to do that all the way around the beadwork by picking up a 15 and then sewing through the next 15 sticking out. And sometimes it does help to turn your work upside down. It helps you to see it a little bit better where you're actually going with the needle. And so I'll complete this row, and I'll meet you back right before I get ready to add the last bead and step up. Okay, so I have come around with the 15th, and as you can see, I'm getting ready to add the last 15 between those two delicas. And once again, as I pass through the delica, I'm also coming up into the first 15 that I added in this round. And I'll go ahead and pop that bead right into place. Now, you can see that the beads are over the girdle of the crystal, but I want to tighten that up a little bit. So all I'm going to do is I am going to sew through all of the beads in this manner. Go through the next delica and up the 15. Delica 15. And because I'm exiting from that 15, I can go right down into that delica on the diagonal, come back up into the 15 on the diagonal. So I'm going to do that all the way around the beadwork, just to really pull nice and secure and to secure my stone in place. So once I get done with that, I'll meet you back. Let me show you one more time. We're going exiting from a 15. We're sewing through the delica on the diagonal and up again through the 15 on the diagonal. And I'm just going to keep doing that and pull nice and snug as I work through this reinforcement round. So I finished up that first round of reinforcements, and as you can see here, I'm exiting out of one of my 15 O's. Now, if you feel like you need to do a little more tightening, you can do a few more rounds of reinforcement if you need to. Once you feel like everything is good and secure and you're ready to move on, we are going to step down through this beadwork. So in order to do that, what we are going to do is we're going to move backwards down on the diagonal till we are coming out of one of our delica beads. So we will go down a delica on the diagonal, and we will keep going down on the diagonal through these delicas. That was row 4, so I need to move through the next 3. 1, 2, 3. You see how I'm stitching on that diagonal, and don't sew through your interfacing if you can help it. And go ahead and get through your 4 beads of your 4 rows of peyote. And then once you have gotten there, we are going to try to position ourselves back at one of our corners here in order to do the next row, which we are going to be stitching 1 row of 11 seed beads around our bezel. And what this is going to do is it's going to hide any imperfections we might have along here, and it's going to prevent your customer or yourself from being able to see any of the interfacing underneath the project as we get ready to finish it off. You won't see any of this white interfacing, as you can see right here. You see our beads, and then on the back, of course, I've used some ultra suede as the backing, but we'll talk about that when we get ready to add that in our crystals to finish up the project. So in order to get into position, you can simply take your needle and sew up down through the interfacing, You can sew, you want to stay as close to where your thread is exiting as possible out of that delicate. You see there that I'm just going to push through from the front to the back. I'm going to pull my thread through. And then I can basically just, you see where my thread is exiting here? I can just come under the interfacing up closer to the point of my crystal, just like that. You see, you can't see anything on the front side. I'm just sewing through that interfacing. There was one reason I told you guys to try to not use too much glue when you glue your crystal down to your interfacing. So here I am really close to the corner. And what I want to do is I want to come up just slightly to the left or the right of the point, just like we did when we started adding our very first row of beads. So here I am, and I'm coming up just slightly to the left. And we'll pull my thread all the way through, just like that. So I've removed my 15-0s from my bead mat, and I've dumped out some of these beautiful 11-0s, and these are the same as my 15-0s. They are the Starlight Galvanized Permanent Finished Round Seat Beads by Toho, size 11. And what we're going to do is we're going to add, like I said, just one row of these 11-0s all along this outside edge of our peyote bezel. And we're going to do that just like we did in the beginning with the very first round of delicates. So we'll pick up two, let me zoom out just a little, and we're going to let those drop down to the beadwork, just like this. I am going to position those beads using my finger to tighten, cinch up my thread. I want one bead on one side of the point and one on the other. I'm going to take my needle and come down right in front of that 11-0 here on the right hand side. I'm left-handed, so I'm sewing, you know, to the right. So once I pull those beads into position, I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come back up. I want the working thread between those two beads on the outside edge of my needle. And I want my needle to be between that thread and the delicate beads of my bezel. Pull it through. And then just pass through the last seed bead that you picked up to get into position. And then we'll just add our beads two at a time, just like we did when we were adding our very first row of delicates to the interfacing to secure our stones. We'll just drop them down. And I love you being able to use your working thread to help you guide those beads around so you can see where you want to poke your needle down through the interfacing. Make sure you don't have any bulging spots and that the beads are brushing up against each other as well as the peyote bezel, like that. Come down in front of that seed bead, the last one. Then we're going to bring our needle up right behind that last seed bead here between the thread and the delicate beads, just like that. And then just sew through that 11-0 before you pick up your next two beads. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get this round of 11-0 round beads added on, and I'll meet you guys back when I'm just about to finish up the row. So I've gotten up to this other corner, and I've went ahead and added the two beads here. And what I'm going to do is I am going to position these beads so that one side is on the left and one is on the right. And then I am going to turn my work around a little bit so I can make sure I'm putting my needle in a good spot. And I'm going to come down in front of that last bead that I picked up. And once again, I'm changing directions here. So when I come back up through my beadwork, I want to be right on the tip. But I want to be between the thread. See, the thread there is on the outside edge of that needle. And the delicate bead. So this is where I'm going to come up. And then I will sew down through or up through, as the case may be, because I've moved my beadwork in the facing upwards now. And I'm just going to sew through that last bead I picked up. And I must have a little bit of a tangle here. Usually if these two threads get even closely attached to each other here at the end, where it comes off your needle, sometimes you'll get those threads a little wrapped around each other, and it will cause your work to pull, like you just saw mine doing. So now I'm just going to pull my thread through, and I'm going to hold my thumb in place and snug that beadwork back up because it got away from me. So now I'm ready to go on around the curve. And I'm going to carry on with picking up the 2 beads, dropping them down. Same thing we've been doing all along this other side of this crystal, right here. I'm going to use my working thread to make sure I'm following a nice straight line around the outer edge there. I'll line the thread up along the bezel, where previously I was lining the thread up along the edge of the stone. So now I've come around the corner. I'm just going to bring my needle up right behind that last seed bead I picked up again, between the working thread and the delicate beads of the bezel, and then come through the seed bead before I pick up my next set of beads. All right, so I'm going to continue on till I get all the way around, and then once I've come all the way around, I'm going to reinforce that whole round of beads just like we did before with our delicates before we started the peyote. So just go ahead and get through adding these beads. Then we want to sew through all the beads just on the top and reinforce. So I'm getting ready to add my last 2 beads here. And don't worry, on this particular round, if you can only fit 1 in, you can go ahead and just add 1, because we're not doing peyote off of this row, so it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to come back up right behind that last bead. And when I go to sew through that last bead I picked up this time, I'm also going to sew through that very first bead on the left-hand side that we started the round from. Remember, I started with 1 bead on the left and 1 bead on the right, so that this is what I have. So now before I do my reinforcement row, I am going to pick up an 11-0 seed bead, and I'm going to sew through the next several beads as part of my reinforcement. But I'm going to add this one little bead here at the tip just to give that a nice crisp corner look to it up here. You see how this looks really good going all the way around, and it gives this just adds a little accentuation to what your actual corners are here at the points of your crystal. So that's what I'm doing. You don't have to do that. You can just sew straight through. You see how that adds a little bit of a sticking outness to that bead to accentuate that this is indeed where the corners of the stone are. You can do it any way you want. It's up to you. Either way is fine. And then just continue sewing through all the beads without skipping any. Once you get to the other corner, if you decide to add that extra bead, we'll show you what to do here just as soon as I get there. I'm almost up there now. All right, so here I am sewing through the rest of the beads here on the left-hand side. And pull everything nice and snug. Once I get here, I'm going to pick up 1 more of these 11-0s. And I'm going to sew through the beads on the opposite side, plus as many as I can get through comfortably without skipping any beads. So there's the bead I picked up, and I'm coming the other way. So I'm going to pull that bead into position, and once again you see how it gives a nice point look here to the two ends of the marquee, just to kind of accentuate what the shape of the stone. All right, now I'll continue on sewing through the rest of these beads up the side. When you reach the end of your other side, I sewed back down this way, and you can see here where my thread is exiting. I pulled my thread through this way first, and then I sew across that tip bead right here. And then sew through a couple of more beads on the opposite side. Doesn't really matter how many, just a few is fine. So now what we'll need to do is simply just end this working thread off for now, because we're going to have to go ahead and glue our ultra suede onto the back of our project and let that dry overnight before we come back and do the edging beads here, for which I use these 2mm crystals and a couple of more of the 11O seed beads. So the easiest way to end this thread is to pay attention to what the bead your working thread is exiting, and then poke yourself back through between the 11O seed beads and the delicas, poke down through the interfacing, and bring your thread to the back side of your work surface. Now we are going to just sew through the interfacing here a couple of times, and we're going to tie a couple of half-hitch knots. I just mean move your needle through a small space there, wrap the thread around the needle a couple of times, bring it through, cinch that knot up, go up through the interfacing, and where you want to go up is you want to come out between the 11Os and the delicas, come up one, sew back down, very close to the same spot, just sew back down, come through a little bit more of your interfacing here, wrap the thread around the needle a few times, tie another half-hitch knot, and repeat that a couple of times, and then you can cut your thread. What I would suggest you do after you've made this little half-hitch knot right here, you'll want to move away from that before you end the thread. So you'll move through the interfacing a little bit more, step back through one more time between the 11Os and the delicas. Right there. Come up and go right back down. And take a few stitches across the interfacing before cutting the thread. All right. So that is it for right now. What I'm going to do is I'll come back in a couple of minutes as soon as I cut my thread, and we'll go ahead and glue the ultra suede piece onto the back. So I've cleaned up my area just a little bit, and I went ahead and got out the E6000 glue. I've got a nice little sharp pair of scissors here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and trim up some of the excess here of my interfacing first. I'm just going to take my scissors and let the flat edge of the scissors butt up against the 11O seed beads, and as I work my way around, trimming off some of this excess here. And try to hold the scissors, up straight up and down, and get some of that edging off, just like that. And if you've got a couple of little places that you want to trim, like around the corner, that's fine. It doesn't have to be perfect right now. So I'm going to move that off to the side, and I'm going to bring over my ultra suede and my glue. So once again, keep in mind that anywhere this glue hardens, you're going to have a little bit of trouble getting your needle through. So when we add the beads on the edging, we're going to be sewing between the interfacing and the ultra suede. So you can see the little stitches right there. And then the crystals are large enough to cover the edge very well, and it looks really nice and professional. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to keep my glue as close in on the inside of my stitching seams. You see my seams here? I want the glue to be on the inside of the thread so that I know I've got some place left, plenty of room here to get my needle back and forth through to put my edging beads on without running the risk of not being able to get my needle pushed through a glue spot. So I'm just going to take a little bit of glue here and I'm going to put it on. I'm going to set this over to the side, and if you know anything about E6000, you know it's probably going to run right out of that, run right out of the end of the nozzle. Now I'm just going to take my finger, and I'm going to smooth that glue on the inside of the threads. You can see there where I've stitched my beads. I want to keep that glue kind of on the inside. Then I am going to get the excess off of my fingers. And then I'm going to take my Ultra Suede, and I am just going to bring it right straight down on top of that, of my little component. So this is what I have. And now I'm just going to let that dry overnight. All right. So that's it for today. I hope you've been enjoying these little videos I've presented to you recently with showing you guys the Potomac bead samples that I got, and showing you, of course, how to do some beginning bead embroidery using these beautiful Potomac crystals. You know, as you know, Swarovski has basically discontinued almost its entire line of elements for beading and bead weavers, and these beautiful Potomac beads crystals are a wonderful alternative option for you to choose from when you are looking for Swarovski alternatives in the future. All right, guys, that's it for today. Like I said, as soon as this gets dried, I will come back and film the remaining portion that shows you guys how to create this beautiful little beaded edge that hides the, hides the interfacing in between, and finishes up the project of this beautiful, gorgeous component here. All right, so that's it for today. I want to thank you for watching, and have a good day.